Okay, so this morning we're going to start, and I just want to read a passage from 1 Corinthians 12. It may be a familiar passage to you if you grew up in church. It may not be familiar, and either way, I'm going to read it. So, spoiler alert. So we're going to start in verse 7. It says, "Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kind of tongues, and to another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each just as determined. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ." Who grew up, who knows this one? Yeah. Oh, some of you didn't do Awanas, and it shows. This is a familiar passage to me, but lately this is actually the passage I've been clinging to for wisdom and hope on what's happening in our current world. Like many of you, I have been overwhelmed. And it feels too much, too big. There is a lot happening. And it feels like every time I try to wrap my mind around something happening, another thing happens, right? And a lot of us have felt the weight of, even in our own city, we have the wildfires in LA, and then we have things going on in our country, and we have ice raids, and we have plastic in the ocean, and we have, name some more crises. What do we? Yes. The national debt, well, personal debt, honey. Okay. I'm not worried about the nation yet. It's so much. It's so much, right? And every time I feel like I look at my phone or I open something up, there's more, and it's more information, and it's more bad, and it's more catastrophic. And when I look at that and I feel like I can't do everything, I end up doing nothing. When it feels too big and I feel like, well, what am I going to do about plastic in the ocean? What am I going to do about these things? I end up doing nothing. What I do is I take in more information and I just am like, oh, it's bigger than I thought, and it's actually bigger than I thought, and I actually am less helpful than I thought, and I'm even less helpful than I thought, and I'm even smaller than I imagined, and actually I can't do anything, and actually now I'm just sad, and actually there's no hope. And that's just 5 minutes on Instagram. But this passage is a reminder that our job isn't to do everything, it's to do our thing. And that is so incredibly important because sometimes when we get overwhelmed with taking in the information, we don't even do our thing. But our thing relies on everyone else doing that too. So there's this framework that we talk about all the time in New Abbey when we talk about our evolution of our relationship with God, that a lot of us started with a codependent relationship with God where we just all you had to do was pray and be like, God, fix the world, you know? And then it moved to independent, where I was like, okay, well, that's not working, so maybe it's just all on me, right? And then where we land is this interdependency with God, where we say all the time here, we have to do our part and believe that God will do God's part. We have to do our part and believe that God will do the only things that God can. But lately I've added this third moment where I'm like, we have to do our part, I have to do my part, believe that God will do God's part, and then I have to hope that my neighbor will do my neighbor's part. Because I think my work is dependent on your work. We say all the time, our healing is intertwined. My healing is tied to your healing, is tied to the communal healing. And it's the same with our work. And it's been so fascinating, and just being in LA in the past few weeks has been the biggest reminder of this. Because in the wake of the fires, I just have so many people in my life I'm seeing do really cool things. Things that, by the way, don't fix it all. We have these friends, James and Deanna. Some of you know them. They are woodworkers, woodsmiths. What's the name for that? God, thank you. A woodsmith? And it's 1942. And they're shoe cobblers. But they just figured out how to make these sifters where there's just 4 pieces of wood and mesh, and they got a bunch of friends together, made an assembly line, and anyone who lost their house, they made these sifters so they could go through and go back through the ash and see if they could find anything that was special to them. And then one of our friends went, she found her mother-in-law's engagement ring, and it's all very special, and that just happened because they did their part. Now, that didn't solve the air quality crisis that people's favorite coffee shops burned down. Our kids can't go to school. But it did something that only they could do, and then they did it. If they sat under the backdrop of this is too much, then what are we going to do, right? My friend Jeannie got a bunch of people over here volunteering at the Dream Center. We got people who were making meals for first responders. Sammy and I moved out of our house. We moved in with Paul. There's a family from Altadena living in our house. This doesn't solve all of it. We're all just doing our one thing. And if we get overwhelmed with what can I do, there's too much, it's too big, we will do nothing. But we can't afford to do nothing because our collective work and healing relies on us all finding our one thing and just doing it. There's, it's Black History Month, right? And we only have 28 days, so I'm going to say it multiple times every Sunday. Okay, it's Black History Month, guys. And there's a new biography out, a book, okay, not a movie. But hopefully it will be a movie for those of us who, it's like 500 pages, so I'm like, this could be a fast movie. But it's a new biography on John Lewis, who's like my angel, okay, my North Star. If you don't know him, he's just one of the most pivotal roles in the civil rights movement, and he's an angel. And so I'm reading this biography, and I'm at the point in the book where they're talking about the sit-ins, okay? We all know the sit-ins, right? If not, just go back and Google. We're not going to... So I'm at the part of the book where they're talking about planning the sit-ins, and they planned for 1 year. This group of students would go and meet with James Lawson. He was a professor at Vanderbilt. They would go and they would meet and they would learn about nonviolent approaches, and they would plan the sit-ins, and they would, for a year, 365 days, okay, a calendar year, they would go and do this every single week, and they would get trained up and prepared to do the one thing that they were doing. They were going to do these sit-ins. They were focused on desegregating the stores in this neighborhood, and that's what they did. And it is such a beautiful thing when you sit down and realize how much thought went into that, how much preparation. Before they even did the sit-ins, okay, you guys, they would go for weeks, and they would just go and sit at the counter just to, like, temperature check. And they would say, can we get served? And they would say, no. And then they would say, okay, thank you. And they would leave. Because they're just gathering information. For a year, okay? And I say that all, and I say this with, like, empathy in my chest, but some of us crash out if one tweet doesn't change the world. And we have a long history of people who said, for 1 year, I'm going to plan one thing for one aspect of one issue in one city, in one county, in one country. And I'm going to spend an entire year setting it up to make sure that I'm prepared. Do you think that nothing else racist happened in that year that they were planning it? Do you think that nothing else bad happened? Do you think that no other catastrophes happened in the world? They said, this is what I can do. Fannie Lou Hamer's going to do voting registration. These people are going to do this. They're going to desegregate the bus system. We're doing this. And they stuck to their one thing. And that is how you make a movement move. That is what I mean when I say our work is interdependent. It's relying on each other. You have to trust that someone's working on voter registration. You have to trust that someone's working on the bus station. You have to trust that someone's working inside the government. You have to trust that someone's out there protesting. You have to trust that your neighbor's going to do your neighbor's work. And if you trust that, then that means that you have to do your work. I get a little frustrated sometimes when I'm like, you guys, we're not the only people to exist under a racist government. Okay, this isn't, we have blueprints, we have history, we have people. And if anything that I've learned from studying this movement is that it takes thousands of people to make a movement move. You have leaders that you've heard of, you have leaders you've never heard of. You have people who are marching in the streets, you have people who are cooking meals for the people marching in the streets. You have people boycotting on the bus. You have people driving people to work so that they don't have to take the bus. You have churches having meetings. You have people making signs. You have people working in the system. You have people working out of the system. It took thousands of people to make that movement move. And sometimes I feel like we get so paralyzed when we're like, I can't do the whole movement. That's okay. That's okay. You have to trust that you are joined with people who believe in the redemptive power of Jesus, that believe in a just and kind and beautiful world and are going to work to do that in the way that only they can. And that can look so many different ways. If it looks like exactly everyone in your newsfeed, I might argue that that's not your work. And beyond that point, I would also argue it's probably not online. I don't know if the comment section is where we're going to turn the tide on this thing. But it should look different. We should be doing different things. I have this memory from one of the trips I led down south. And so you all know Letters from a Birmingham Jail that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote when he was in Birmingham Jail. If you haven't read, they're amazing. But he was in Birmingham, and just down the street, he was staying at this hotel that also had like a little nightclub in it. And it was just around the corner from 16th Street Church, right, where there was a bombing, which is just a reminder to me of like the proximity of the movement and how many things people were holding at the same time. But this man who owned the nightclub, he said, like, I'm just here to give the leaders of the movement a night off. Like, that was his whole thing. Like, he just owned a club. And he was like, this is my role in the movement, is letting this thing happen. And we need it. We need it all, right? We need Dr. King. We need this nightclub man. We need people doing all of these things. I had my neighbors, our old neighbors, they put on a comedy show after the fires because they were just like, I don't have, they're all aspiring comedians, you know? So they don't have a lot to give. And that's they said, baby, what I'm not going to give is dollars, but what I can give is these laughs. And so they did. And that's important. And that's their work. For us to say, like, I don't know how to overthrow the government, all I can do is tell jokes, then tell jokes. And if you know how to overthrow the government, go do that. If you're like a civil rights attorney, do that. If you're something else, do that. It's all important. But if we just like doom scroll and feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do about plastic in the ocean, I don't know, like, just pick one thing. What's the one thing you can do? And if everyone does that, I know this sounds so elementary, but I feel like we really forget. Also, out of responsibility to our collective, my call, the call that I'm like my work is dependent on you doing yours, is dependent on you doing yours, is dependent on you doing yours. And no work is too big or small. And it all matters. I was watching this man talk, and he was an older gay man, and he was talking about living through the AIDS epidemic. And he said something that, like, just shook all the leaves on my tree. That's a saying I just made up. But it kind of worked. Yeah, write that down. He said, we buried our friends in the morning, we protested in the afternoon, and we danced at night. And he said, it was the dancing that kept us going. Listen, it's all important. If you want to open a nightclub, you want to put on joy. I say this every single week when you do good news. Joy is its own act of resistance in the world. And if you feel like you are in a position to bring some joy, please do that work. If you are in a position to organize the protest for the afternoon and you are in a position to get the community together and rally, please do that. If you are in the position to honor and celebrate and do some kind of healing ceremony, if you have these bowls at home, whatever it is, like, do that. But my fear is sometimes we get so overwhelmed and we forget how important our work is to one another, even the smallest moments. It's going to take thousands of people doing what they can to make this move. And not to be like all conspiracy theory, but I think sometimes when we get so distracted by all the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and this thing is wrong and this thing is wrong and this thing is wrong, we're not going to do our thing. There is a lot happening. RuPaul always says, the prophet, okay. He says, you can look at the darkness, just don't stare. I get it. Be informed. Know what's happening. But you don't need to consume hours of the worst things happening in the world. You need to know what's happening, and then you need to figure out what is your thing, what is your role in this movement. We're all here in this building because we believe in a story and we believe in wisdom that came from someone coming down to this earth and saying, I want to turn everything on its head and I want to confront the corrupt power systems and structures of the day. And I want to take the empire down. I will build up a new kind of covenant and a new thing where the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And people aren't oppressed and we can do all these things. That's why we're all here. And so if we believe in that work, then we have to look around and say, I believe that that's possible, and here's my corner of the work where it can happen. Easy. You can make 10 sandwiches for first responders. Do it. You could do a comedy show. You're a secret billionaire, you haven't told anyone, and you can just like rebuild some houses. I don't know what your work is. But also, just come see me after if that's you. I got a couple things that I talk about. But I've been a little bit, it's been difficult, and I've been a little bit discouraged when every time I feel like I talked to someone last week, I'm like, how are you doing? And they're like, well, what can we even do? We're screwed. It's all bad. We're done. I'm like, well, yeah, with that attitude, okay? This moment isn't the only thing that exists. And so if you are feeling lost, especially this month, I would encourage you to go back and to read about and research and find out some of the leaders whose names you've never heard of from a movement that changed the ground we stand on. I would have you go back and remember that we are not the first people to live in a season where there are people in power who don't have our best interests at heart. And I would encourage you to remind yourself that your work is just important, even if you feel like you can't do it all. You can do something, I guarantee it. And so it takes a little, I feel like, responsibility from us to like peel ourselves away from the darkness, from staring, and to say, okay, well, what can I do? What's my work? And if we all do that, we'll do something. You guys know how bad I am at endings. What was that? To quote myself, I'm shaking the leaves on my own tree, and I would encourage you to do the same. That it didn't land the way I wanted to. But truly, I think I've seen healing happen in this room, in this community, because of other people who have healed in this community. And I think it's time for us to take the next step. And I want to see work happen in this community because other people are committed to work happening. And that takes maturity and responsibility, and I think we need that in this season. That's where hope comes from. It doesn't just like land on you one day. It's something you have to practice and cultivate. It's something you have to commit to. It takes discipline. It takes not staring. It takes practicing joy. It takes all of these things. Hope comes in the doing, and so we need to get to the work. And with that, you're going to grab the same 3 or 4 people around you and answer this question. What is your one thing this week? Enjoy.